The Fisherman's Tale. The account of a close encounter that follows is one of the classics of UFO literature, and deservedly so if the story told by the witnesses is true. But is it? The case is typical of many UFO reports. There were few witnesses, the bulk of the information coming from one man, as the second witness lost consciousness at the beginning of the incident. In such circumstances, even when sophisticated techniques such as lie detector tests are used, only the personal integrity of the witnesses can substantiate their story. The 6-month period from October 1973 to March 1974 was a remarkable one for UFO sightings, particularly in the United States, Northwest Europe, Italy, and Spain. One of the most outstanding reports in the USA came from PASCAGOULA, county town, Jackson County in the state of Mississippi. This town, with a population of just under 30,000 at the time, is situated at the south mouth of the Pascagoula River on the coast of the Gulf of Mexico, about 100 miles, 160 kilometers, to the east of New Orleans. There were 2 witnesses, both of whom worked locally at the Walker shipyard: Charles E. Hickson, aged 45, a foreman, and Calvin R. Parker, Jr., 18, who alleged that, on 11 October 1973, they experienced a close encounter with a UFO and its occupants, and subsequent abduction, while fishing from the pier of the Walker shipyard on the Pascagoula River. It was about 9 p.m. when Hickson turned to get fresh bait. He says it was then that he heard a zipping noise. Looking up, he saw an elongated oval bluish-gray craft, which in a later interview he was to refer to as a spacecraft. It had very bright, flashing, blue-looking lights. This object was hovering some 2 feet, 60 centimeters, off the ground, and when the next move came, the witness was a trifle puzzled, for he said, "It seemed to open up, but really there wasn't a door there at all, and 3 creatures came floating out towards us. I was so scared, I couldn't believe it was happening." The creatures were said to be pale, ghost-like, and about 1.5 meters, tall. Their skin seemed to be wrinkled, and was a grayish color, while in place of hands they had crab-like claws or pincers. According to the witness's first report, these entities may have had slits for eyes, but he did not see them. They did have 2 small cone-shaped ears and a small pointed nose, with a hole below in the place of a mouth. They approached the 2 flabbergasted fishermen and floated just off the ground without moving their legs. A buzzing noise was heard from one of them, and I, said Hickson, they were on us before we knew it. The older man was paralyzed with fear, and Parker passed out when, apparently, he was touched by one of the creatures. Meanwhile, 2 of the entities lifted Hickson from the ground, and they glided motionless into the craft. Hickson claims he had lost all sensation of feeling and weight. He was taken into a very brightly lit room which, however, had no visible light fixtures. His friend was led into another room by the 3rd entity. Hickson says he was placed in a reclining position and suspended in such a way that he did not touch any part of the craft. His limbs were completely paralyzed. Only his eyes were free to move. An instrument that looked like a big eye floated freely backwards and forwards about 9 inches, 25 centimeters above his body, and the creatures turned him so that all parts of his body came under the instrument's scrutiny. After some time, Hickson was guided back outside the craft and was floated, together with Parker, back to his position on the pier, landing upright on his feet. He says he was so weak-kneed that he fell over. Calvin Parker was unconscious throughout the incident, so all the evidence comes from Charlie Hickson. In his first interview, he said the UFO was about 10 feet, 3 meters wide, and something like 8 feet, 2.5 meters, high. When it left, he said, it disappeared from sight in less than a second. The occupants were like robots. They acted like they had a specific thing to do, and they did it. They didn't try to communicate with us. I know now that they didn't intend to hurt us physically, but I feared they were going to take us away. I would like to emphasize that they didn't mean us any harm." That statement was made in an interview with the Mississippi Press a week after the incident. On the day of the encounter, Hickson and Parker had called at the paper's offices and found them closed. They then went to the sheriff's office at 11 p.m. to make a report. Richard W. Hayden gave details of what took place in a report to Flying Saucer Review. Sheriff Fred Diamond and Captain Glenn Ryder interrogated the witnesses, doing everything they could to break the stories, but to no avail. Ryder commented, "If they were lying to me, they should be in Hollywood." The interviews were taped. Then the two officers left the witnesses alone and unaware that the recorder was still running. They spoke agitatedly about their experience, and Calvin Parker was so emotionally overcome that they started praying when Hickson left the room. The sheriff was convinced the two fishermen were telling the truth. Next morning, Friday, 12th October, Detective Tom Huntley from the sheriff's office drove Hickson and Parker to Keesler Air Force Base at Biloxi, Mississippi, where they were checked for radiation. There was no evidence of contamination. While there, they gave details of their experience to the head of intelligence at the base, who acted as though he'd heard it all before. I find this statement very interesting. A similar comments pop up time after time in UFO sightings that are reported to Air Force personnel. M.W. On Sunday, 14th of October, the witnesses were interviewed by Dr. J. Allen Hynek of Northwestern University, Evanston, Illinois, former civil scientific consultant on UFO reports to the U.S. Air Force, and Dr. James Harder of the University of California, Berkeley. Dr. Harder hypnotized the men individually, regressing them to the time of the experience. They each relived the terror of the occasion to such an extent that Dr. Harder said, "The experience they underwent was indeed a real one. A very strong feeling of terror is practically impossible to fake under hypnosis." Dr. Hynek was more reserved. "There is no question in my mind that these men have had a very terrifying experience." On 30th of October, Hickson, but not Parker, who was apparently suffering from a nervous breakdown, underwent a polygraph examination, lie detector test, at the Pendleton Detective Agency in New Orleans. It was reported that the polygraph operator, Scott Glasgow, was forced to admit after 212 hours of exhaustive tests that Hickson was telling the truth. If this is true, it was a very strange remark for a polygraph operator to make. Polygraph tests are not sufficient to establish that a subject is lying, and any polygraph operator would have been well aware of this. In his book UFOs Explained, Philip J. Klass claims that his own investigations have shown that Scott Glasgow was not, in fact, qualified as a polygraph operator. So it seems that, in spite of the newspaper publicity given to the fact that Hickson's story stood up to the lie detector test, it must remain inconclusive. Hickson's experiences brought him considerable publicity. He appeared on television shows and even wrote a book, but unfortunately, his story often changed in the telling. Originally, for instance, he claimed that the UFO was some 10 feet, 3 meters long, but in subsequent interviews, he said it was 20 or 30 feet, 7 or 10 meters long. Quite a difference. Hickson's descriptions of the alien creatures also varied on different occasions. In his original account, Hickson claimed they had 2 small cone-like ears, possibly slits where the eyes should have been, and a small sharp nose with a hole below it. Later, again on a television show, he said there were no eyes and that the hole below the nose was a slit. And more than a month after the incident, he disclosed for the first time that the light inside the spacecraft had been so bright that he'd suffered severe eye injury, which had persisted for about 3 days. These discrepancies, of course, tend to cast doubt upon the entire story, although they do not disprove it. But there are reports that possibly corroborate the evidence. Although no one but Hickson and Parker saw the UFO, despite the fact that the incident happened close to Highway 90, a busy road, many owners of television sets in the Pascagoula area reported interference. On the same day, 11th October, 450 miles, 700 kilometers, away near Hartwell, Georgia, a former Methodist minister was driving along when he saw a UFO land on the road in front of him. He also saw silver-suited, white-haired occupants. On the same night, too, Police Chief Greenshaw of Falkville, Alabama, was telephoned by a woman who claimed that a spaceship had landed in a field near her house. He raced to the location, armed with a Polaroid camera. There was nothing at the alleged site, but Greenshaw said he was confronted by a silver-suited creature on a side road. He took 4 Polaroid shots, which indeed show a silvery creature obligingly turning to face the camera. The entity bolted, and Greenshaw gave chase in his patrol car, but failed to catch up with it, an inconclusive end to an intriguing series of events. Pascagoula, Mississippi. October of 1973 saw an extraordinary wave of UFO sightings across America, but none so incredible as that of the abduction of shipyard workers Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker. It was 7 o'clock in the evening of 12th October, when the pair were fishing from a pier at the shipyard. Suddenly they realized that there was something behind them, a machine making a buzzing noise. They saw an oval-shaped object with a blue light on it just behind them. The witnesses watched as a hatchway opened in the object and 3 bizarre entities floated out. As Hickson described it, they didn't have clothes, but they had feet shape. It was more or less a round-like thing on a leg, if you'd call it a leg. I was scared to death. And with the spinning reel out there, it's all I had. I was so scared, you can't imagine. Calvin done went hysterical on me. The entities were described as ghost-like and pale with wrinkled skin, and conical projections where nose and ears would normally be. Using crab-like pincers, they apparently floated Hickson into the UFO. Parker had fainted, though there is some suggestion that in fact he too was conscious when they abducted him. His hypnotic recall is unclear on the point. Inside the craft, Hickson could not move, though he believes he remained conscious. Hickson does not clearly remember leaving the craft, but eventually found himself on the dock with Parker, who was looking very agitated. The UFO is described as something around 8 feet tall and oblong, with an opening in one end and a blue light outside. Inside it was bright, but with no obvious source of lighting. While inside the object, Hickson was examined by a roving eye type of machine. I spoke to Hickson in July 1990, and he confirmed that there had been many other strange occurrences to himself and his family in the years since, and that he was assisting investigators with research to help make sense of the data. In 1987, he stated, "I was offered all kinds of money to let them do a movie. I declined. I am still declining. Making money is not what this experience is all about. Witness credibility is very important in such cases. When I met and spoke to Hickson and his son in 1990, I was instantly impressed by their obvious sincerity and honesty.